Your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, and then we'll jump over to Matthew 10. So do what I typically don't like being told what to do, and that is put one finger in Luke 14 and the other in Matthew 10. And we're going to read just a verse or two in each of those chapters and get right into it. Here in Luke 14, while you're turning, as a review from last week regarding this chapter, Jesus has just concluded a parable about a wealthy individual who invited all these people to his house for dinner, and a lot of those people didn't come. They didn't accept his invitation. They all made excuse. Someone said, I've got a wife and I've got to go home. She's quite the nag, and if I don't make her happy, it'll be a rough life. I bought property, I have to go check it out. I got some oxen, I got to go check it out. And the rich man was just unhappy about all this rejection. And so he tells his servant, go out into the highways, byways, and hedges, compel the strangers, the maimed, the lame, the sick. Tell them to come on in. We'll fill up the house with strangers. So that's what he did, and he was teaching, obviously, a much deeper meaning than who we should invite to dinner. But right after he said that, multitudes followed them because multitudes realized Jesus was teaching something fresh. They had had enough of the Pharisaical religion and all the hypocrisy that was being displayed for centuries. And so people followed him because he offered the truth. He offered something genuine. Well, when he sees all these people following him, he wants to make sure they know what they're getting into. He wants to make sure that they understand this isn't just a new hippie religion where, you're going to have fun, we're going to kumbaya, and it'll be fantastic. This is a big deal, serious stuff. Verse 26, look what he says to his followers. He says, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. He said to them, listen, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to be my disciple, if you're going to be my student, if you're going to be my follower, don't plan on making any excuses. Now, I don't want to hear about all the things you have in your life. This is the Son of God that's speaking, and if you're going to follow me, you've got to be all in. You've got to make me more important than your father, than your mother, than your wife, than your husband, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, your friends. Oh, and by the way, you have to make me more important than yourself. But he says hate, and that's a word that people get tripped up on because they think, wow, Jesus is speaking hypocritically here. We know his message is one of love throughout the Gospel of John, and he was, the Savior that was bringing peace to the world, so why would he say hate here? Well, that's why I've got you in Matthew chapter 10. I don't know any Greek, and so lucky for you, I'm not going to bore you with the Greek word for hate and then tell you which one I want to pick to define the text. I've got a Bible that got designed that you don't need to know Hebrew or Greek. It will define itself. And if you compare the passages in the Gospels and throughout the Bible, words will be defined. So what does it mean when he says, hate not his father and mother? Is he saying we literally should hate them? That we should spew out anger out of our mouths and have this hatred in our heart for them? Of course not. In Matthew 10, verse 37, you'll notice very similar wording that again will define what we just read. And Jesus says in Matthew 10, verse 37, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. And so you have in these two parallel passages this teaching that you cannot be my disciple equated with not worthy of me. And then you have hating father and mother equated with loving father and mother less than me. If you love your father or mother, your husband or wife, son or daughter, brother or sister, more than me, you're not worthy of me. You cannot be my disciple. Now, he wants us to love one another with a tremendous amount of love. But we should not and cannot love our family members and friends more than Christ. Otherwise, we cannot be his disciples. Last week, I talked about relationships and how I don't think you can argue, but maybe some will, especially if you're not a people person, but I don't know how you can argue people not being the most precious thing this world has to offer. I think there are a lot of things the world has to offer. A lot of beautiful sights you can go see, a lot of experiences you can experience, a lot of things you can do, a lot of pursuits you can pursue, a lot of possessions you can possess, a lot of food you can eat, a lot of drinks you can drink, a lot of great things in this life. But nothing is more precious than relationships. Whether it's with a spouse, with a parent, with a sibling, with a child, with a friend, with a neighbor, with somebody from the other side of the world you just met, they're precious. And here Jesus is taking the most precious thing that is available to mankind, that one thing that we all long for, even though we take them for granted, we take people for granted until they're threatened to be taken from us, don't we? Don't we? This is where you participate. Okay. Some questions I don't want you to answer, this one I want you to answer. Do we not take people for granted? You don't want to anger me. I'm in no mood this week, all right? It's been a sobby week. I'll take you to Roswell. I'll take you down there and show you how precious relationships are. Yeah. Jesus is saying, you love your dad, don't you, son? You can't love him more than me. So that's what he's talking about, not some flippant, casual remark to get their attention. This is a big deal. See, the real litmus test to our love for Christ is whether or not we love somebody else more. Now, I hope you love your spouse passionately. I hope you love your children unconditionally. I hope you love your neighbors zealously. I hope you love people around you fervently. But we cannot love them more than Jesus. Otherwise, we are unworthy of him, and we cannot be his disciples. Now, the best way to prove our love to Christ is to say no to someone we really love. I've counseled couples, and this might surprise you, those of you who are married, but in-laws tend to be a problem for couples. I mean, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the sister-in-law, maybe the brother-in-law once in a while, but the in-laws definitely cause problems for marriages. And it's not uncommon for a spouse, both men and women, to be upset with their spouse because their spouse can't say no to their family for the sake of their spouse. Maybe it's the Easter dinner. You know, we do the Easter dinner every year. We've got to go. Even though it's just a nightmare every year, it only causes more problems for the rest of the year. It's a disaster, and you never spend time with your immediate family. But we got to go. I just can't tell Mom no. Do you know what happens if I tell Mom no? Well, if you don't tell Mom no, you're telling your spouse she's more important than you. Or them, I should say, right? So we have to say no to someone we love, deal with the ramifications of feeling bad, of them getting upset, to prove our love to somebody else. And when it comes to Jesus Christ, he wants us to be able to say no to everyone in the world for the sake of saying yes to him. That's what this is all about. It's pretty impressive stuff. But as I mentioned last week, it's not just, oh, here we go again. Christianity is so hard. It makes us do tough things. No, Christ isn't asking you to do tough things. Christ is asking you to do the best thing for you and your family. Saying yes to Jesus Christ every time will be the best thing for you. Because Jesus isn't saying, all right, jump off that cliff. And your family's begging you to stay, on the bridge. No, I got to jump off the cliff to prove my love to Jesus. Oh, he's not going to take us from our families or do things that will hurt our relationships or our families. He always asks of us to do the right thing, to deny ourselves, to be in the Scriptures, to be in church, to preach the gospel, to say no to the flesh, no to the world, no to the devil. He's always asking us to do those things that will only help our loved ones, that will only help our lives. And so don't approach this with, oh man, this is going to be hard. No, this is going to be the best thing for everybody. We started last week by looking at marriage, and I mentioned when it comes to your partner, sometimes you just have to say no. A happy wife in Genesis 16 did not equate to happy life, did it? In fact, I was sitting this past week in Roswell just surveying my father, and I will not go into detail because there's no way I'll be able to contain myself, but I'm just watching him suffer. And whenever I see someone suffer, whenever I go to a funeral, whenever I see sickness, I always get very angry at sin. I don't know if you do that. You should. We tend to get angry at God. God, what's wrong with you? How could you do this to them? How could you do this to him or her? God didn't do this to anybody. Sin did this to our world. And so I get very angry at sin, and I very quickly turn to my sin. You know who's responsible for all the hurt in this world? Me. You say, no, preacher, you haven't murdered anybody. You didn't do this to your dad. You didn't do this to everyone else. Yeah, but I'm sinning, aren't I? Which means I introduced sin into this world myself. I didn't need Adam to do it. I did it myself. Therefore, I'm contributing to the curse. I'm contributing to the pain. Be careful to get mad at God. This is our fault, not God's. And so when I think about my sin, I think of the sin of the world, and I take ownership, responsibility. I hate it. I go back to the garden, and I think, Adam, you dirty dog, look what you did to us. But then I have to say, would I have done anything different? Probably not. But why am I bringing this up now? What if Adam would have said no to Eve? Adam gets a bad rap. We all know the biblical account, right? Eve took the fruit first. Eve said to Adam, eat, honey. And he was unwilling to say no to her. So he said, yes, dear. And heaven heard a loud, no, God! And immediately the curse was introduced into our world. Death became a reality. Cancer was introduced into our genes. Murder was then introduced into our history. And ever since that, yes, dear, this world has suffered because somebody didn't have the courage to say to his wife, whom he loved, whom he couldn't imagine living without, he was unwilling to say, no, sweetheart, I can't eat of that fruit. And who paid the price? Adam, Eve, but you understand they had to watch their son get murdered by their other son? I was even thinking these, when you're sitting around watching suffering, you think of a lot of things. And I think to myself, I believe Adam and Eve are probably in heaven. I believe they have experienced the mercy of God. What have they been doing for thousands and thousands of years? They've been watching this earth suffer. And do you know who you and I are? We are the descendants of Adam and Eve. Sometimes we think they're these distant people that have no connection with us. We are their great, 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 whatever great-grandchildren. We are of Adam and Eve. And our suffering is a result of Adam not being able to say, no, dear. Deep, I realize. 1 Kings chapter 1, moving on to our second point that I can assure you will not be moving on beyond this. It's 11:43. Blame Chocolate Thunder for not getting the third and fourth points. It's great to have you both with us. It's really good to see you. 1 Kings chapter 1. Let's get personal. When it comes to your parenthood, moms and dads, just say no. 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 Parents love to give their kids what they want, don't they? And kids are really good at getting what they want because they're very good at whining. That comes natural to every child. And persistence. Children are very persistent, aren't they? Especially as little kids. Can I have the candy? Can I have the candy? Can I have the candy? They'll take you and wear you down until you say, yes, just stop, leave me alone. They get what they want. I've watched it here. It's hilarious. I watch kids ask their parents, can I go get a piece of candy? And I watch the dance. It's like a tango. I need to hit the play button so we can see this go back and forth. And all the rationale and all the counter arguments and the reasons why you should and the reasons why you shouldn't. And usually the kids win. Usually the kids win. It's hilarious. But there are some times we have to make the tough decision to say to the children we love, the children we brought into this world, the children that we look at and see ourselves, it's important sometimes to say no, in particular when God says to say yes to Him, when God wants us to obey Him. We're going to read a story here, and you'll understand why it's so important to say no to our kids. Number one, it will show God, it will show Jesus that we love Him more than our own children. And number 2, it will be the best thing for our kids. 1 Kings chapter 1, this is David's final days on earth. His health was failing. And King David failed to proactively announce and present his successor to the nation. And that successor's name was Solomon. So we'll read a little bit here, verse number 1. Now King David was old and stricken in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he gat no heat. Wherefore his servants said unto him, Let there be sought for my lord the king a young virgin, and let her stand before the king, and let her cherish him, and let her lie in thy bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. So they're looking for a nurse. I realize the passage, if you're reading it from a Western perspective and from a modern perspective, we read that they're looking for a virgin to lay with the king because he's cold, and we automatically go to a far too intimate of setting because of the wording there. The reason they were picking a virgin was because no other man's wife should be touching the king. But a nurse needed to touch the king to warm him. And so they were looking for a full-time nurse that could lay with him, that could minister to him, and help him out. All right, verse number 3. And they sought for a fair damsel throughout all the coasts of Israel, and found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her to the king. And the damsel was very fair. You understand that has nothing to do with her ability to judge a ball game, right? That means she was really good looking, all right? So they found a really good looking girl who was going to nurse King David back into health. So she, verse 4, cherished the king, ministered to him, but the king knew her not. That's a reference to intimacy. So there was nothing inappropriate taking place there. Verse 5, then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. And note verse 6. And his father had not displeased him at any time in saying, What are you doing, boy? Why hast thou done so? Adonijah wasn't the heir. Adonijah had not been chosen by the king to be his successor. Adonijah had not been chosen by God to be David's successor over the people of God, the nation of Israel. Solomon had been chosen. God made it clear to David. Everyone in David's family knew that. But Adonijah, when his father was sick, his father was on his deathbed, his father was weak, his father didn't have everything going for him. Adonijah exalted himself. He quickly got 50 men. They ran before him, and they pronounced him king. He wanted to grab the crown when his father was weak, and there hadn't been a successive plan put in place. You know what Adonijah was? He was a power-hungry, spoiled brat. Yeah, that's what he was. You know what he needed to be told very early in life? No. But he never learned that lesson. In fact, even as an older man, the king himself, at any time, did not go in and say, Adonijah, what are you doing? Adonijah, this isn't your job. Adonijah, this isn't your throne. Adonijah, this isn't your crown. Step down, boy. He never did that. Why? Because he didn't want to displease his son. The great mighty David, who was willing to chop the head off of a giant, the great mighty David, who was willing to get in the face of plenty of Philistines and destroy them, he was afraid of displeasing one of many of his sons. Wasn't good. And as a result of saying yes to Adonijah by saying nothing, he was threatening God by saying no to God. Without resisting Adonijah, because he wasn't God's choice, he was telling God, in many ways, you don't matter, God. Your plan doesn't matter. You're not that important. You're not a priority. My son is more important right now. I don't want to make him unhappy. How about being concerned with not making God unhappy? It's amazing. We're fine with displeasing God. But people that we have to see, people we have to hear, people we have to deal with and live with, we don't want to get them upset. Now, maybe he didn't have the courage. Maybe he didn't have the energy. Maybe he didn't have the strength. But as a result of not telling his son no, his son would eventually suffer terribly. What happens in the story, we won't read it all because it's already 10 to 11 or 10 to 12. And the story goes on like this. Nathan and Bathsheba come in to David and say, David, hope you know what's happening. Out there right now, your son is proclaiming himself king. Is this something you approved. And David, with the help of his wife and the prophet, said, no, that's not what I approved at all. Solomon's supposed to be the king. So they quickly get Solomon out there. They blow the trumpets. Solomon is king. All hail the king. And here he is, which is good. Well, Adonijah gets pretty afraid and goes and holds on to the altar in the temple. And Solomon eventually shows mercy to him and tells him, listen, I'll let you live, but show yourself worthy of life. Show yourself worthy of manhood. Live a righteous life. Stay out of my way. Behave yourself wisely. 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2. The Bible allows us to have a little bit of insight into history to teach us a lesson. That story about Adonijah trying to take the throne over has nothing to do with the Messiah, nothing to do with God's dealings with the nation of Israel. It's really just a small historical detail, but in that detail, God gives us a lesson because he adds chapter 2. And then in verse 13, we read this, and Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. And in verse 15, look at what he says to his, she would be his stepmom, I guess. Yeah. Polygamy makes things complicated. Verse 15, he says to her, thou knowest that the kingdom was mine. Can't you picture this adult, spoiled prince? I had it first. He continues, and all Israel set their faces on me that I should reign. Grow up. Howbeit the kingdom is turned about and has become my brother's, and for it was his from the Lord. He's just whining. Verse 16, he says, now I ask one petition of thee. Deny me not, Mommy. Don't say no. She says, say on, sweetie. Verse 17, he says, speak, I pray thee, unto Solomon the king, for he will not say thee nay. He won't tell you no. Go ask yourself, big boy. Look what he asked for. Oh, man, this was gutsy. Ask him that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. Anybody want to guess why he wants Abishag? Now, we're going to all assume she was a really good-looking lady, and that's why he wants her, right? There's a lot of good-looking ladies, and princes can have their pick. Why that one? Why Abishag? Because Abishag would have been privy to any conversation surrounding the dispute over the crown. Abishag would have known King David very well, having been his nurse 24/7. Furthermore, if Adonijah walks out in public and he has on his arm the former king's nurse, the good-looking nurse, doesn't that give him instant credibility? Doesn't that give him some level of power? What is he doing here? He is threatening the king. For more than just good looks, I assure you, he was a spoiled brat who didn't like being told no, who wanted what he wanted and thought he could get it. He still wanted power. Verse number 18, Bathsheba said, well, I will speak for thee unto the king. So David didn't displease Adonijah at any time saying, what are you doing, boy? Stop doing that. No, you can't have the crown. And now Bathsheba doesn't displease him, doesn't say, what are you doing, boy? No, you can't have Abishag. No way, Jose, that was my husband's former nurse. You're not going to have her and walk her around like a trophy wife and try to compete with Solomon the king. Now, she doesn't say no. David doesn't say no. What were the ramifications? Verse 23, then King Solomon sware by the Lord, saying, God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life. Verse 24, Solomon says, Adonijah shall be put to death this day. See, if you've read this story and you've thought, man, that was a harsh penalty for asking for a lady's hand in marriage. He was doing a lot more than that. He was showing to the king, I'm coming for you, pal. He was showing to the king he was a man who could not be trusted. To ask for this woman, he was showing the king that he was a deceptive man. He was a spoiled man, and he was doing something that could threaten the king's power, authority, credibility, and King Solomon would have nothing to do with it. And said, you know what? That was a bad request to make. Off with the man's head. Whose fault was it that Adonijah died? Now, it's his. He has to own that foolishness and the consequences of it. But who could have prevented Adonijah from showing up to Bathsheba and asking for Abishag? Who could have prevented it? Two people. David, number one, and Bathsheba, number two. But somebody forgot to teach this boy the meaning of the word no. Right? You know what kids need to learn? And they need to learn it early. They need to hear it often. They need to hear the word no. Even better, they need to learn the word no without any explanation. Yeah. I mean, I did this when my kids were young. Can I? No. Why? Because I said so. Boom. Yeah. And we even do it now. Can we do that? Can we do that? Nah. Why? Because I'm the dad. You say, you're a mean dad. No, you know what I'm doing? And trust me, they're living fine. But you know what I'm doing? I'm teaching them that when they go through life, they're going to hear no a lot more than yes. Right? When they go for an interview and they think they can walk in there and just get that job, and then the interviewer says, sorry, you're not the right candidate for us. What? What? No, I deserve this job. And next thing you know, they're hiring a lawyer because something's wrong here. There was some type of prejudice somewhere, and there's no way I'm qualified for every job. No, sorry, you're not as qualified as the next. And this whole trophy business, right? We need to tell kids, no, you're not fit for soccer. Well, why? Because you're slow. Yeah. Go out for football. They take 53. There's a good chance you'll make it. But we need to tell kids no. It's unbelievable. Our teachers are afraid to tell these kids, no, you cannot pass. I was talking to a local teacher who I'm very good friends with, and he was explaining his school district. If I understood the statistics, and don't quote me on this, but whatever it wasn't good. He basically said the passing rate in his school district was 20%. Evidently, it's usually 80-20. His school is 20-80. I said, well, what do you do with all the kids who fail? We just keep moving them through. Well, but, what? How about the kids who are doing good? Well, everybody does good now. You know, it's the trophy, it's the honor roll, merit roll, whatever. There's no incentive to do well, but that's the problem with not saying no to our kids. That's the problem with politicians who can't say no to their constituents. At some point, we have to tell our constituents, no, we can't afford all that. Right? Uh-oh, do we have some takers in here? I mean, do we have people who don't like to be told no in here? Yeah. Our kids have not been told no, and now we have a generation of people that don't know how to handle sorry. No. But whose job is it? Not the schools. Not the government. It's not the church's job. You know whose job it is to teach people the meaning of the word no? It's mom and dad. You say, well, how do I know what to say no to and what to say yes to? I'm glad you asked. When God says yes, you tell the children no. We are to bring our children up in the admonition and nurture of who? The Lord. And so if Johnny wants something that the Lord doesn't want him to have, we as the representatives of God, we as the stewards of our children, have to say, yes, God, no, Johnny. But Dad, I really want it. Yes, no. But please. All right, yes, no. We would rather displease God than displease our children. Why? We love our kids. Don't we love our kids? You know what I would love to do? Give my children the world. But that wouldn't be good for them. Have you thought about your Heavenly Father? You tell me what he says more often to you. Yes or no? You got it, Bob. You know what God's been telling me for 30 days? No. God's not in the spoiling business. We have to learn to deal with the no's in life. Oh, he says yes a lot. Don't get me wrong. He is good. But he taught me the word no when my wife was sick. Or when I wrestled with God. In 2007, 2008, I wrestled with God. I was like Jacob. We had a time. I was on the ropes. I was going after him. He just wanted me to learn, no, boy. So I would say, yes, Lord. We need to teach our children the meaning of the word no. But it hurts. If David was alive when Solomon put his son to death, what would hurt more? Burying your son because he didn't learn the word no, or displeasing your son when he couldn't have the crown? The pain gets worse as we get older when we don't teach our children the meaning of the word no. The ramifications at this age is they start crying a few crocodile tears and forget in 5 minutes. But when they're this tall, the consequences could be a funeral parlor. The consequences could be a kid who doesn't know how to get a job. The consequences could be the kid who doesn't know how to say no to drugs. The consequences get much bigger as they get older. So it hurts, I know, to say no. But you've got to say yes to Jesus. Didn't he say, if you love your son or daughter more than me, you're not worthy of me? Moms and dads, cherish your children. Don't take them for granted at any age, whether they're newly born or teenagers or adults. Don't take your kids for granted. Spend time with them. Love them. Shower them with blessings. Make sure you're securing them with your affection, your affirmation. Make sure you're giving them time, quality time. Make sure you're doing those things that would show them you love them. Make the difference in a kid's life, by the way. But make sure your kids know, as much as you love them, you love Jesus Christ even more. Make sure they know that, because that will teach them somebody is more important than them in this world. And by the way, it's the one who will make their life abundant. Next week, we'll talk to those of you who are not parents necessarily, those of you who are not married necessarily, but there are two more groups of people that we need to learn to say no to when Jesus tells us to say yes to him. Let's stand and have a word of prayer.